Today, as we come to verse 7 of chapter 9, we find that there's somewhat of a shift. It's really kind of a progression to the things that Solomon has been saying. One thing builds upon another. And as we left off yesterday talking about the importance of wisdom and contrasting with the consequence of wisdom with the consequence of being a simpleton or a fool, a naive and inexperienced, and not just simply in a lifestyle sense or a life experience sense, but being a simpleton in terms of your spiritual understanding of life. Because there are many people who are highly accomplished and successful in this world, and people say they're wise in business or they're wise in leadership or government or one thing or another. But when it comes to spiritual things, they don't have a clue about the simplest things of Christ. And that's where you may not be somebody who's going to be the greatest financial guy in the world, make the most money or whatever it is, the fastest runner or most talented singer or whatever. That probably isn't going to happen. Now, you may be the exception, so I grant you that, but that probably won't happen. But what can happen is you can be an expert in the things of God. And that's what leads to godliness. That, as Paul would say in one of his letters, he says to writing to Timothy, in fact, he said, physical exercise profits for a while. In other words, in terms of this lifetime, so it's good advice to try to keep yourself in good physical shape. Keep active, eat the right foods, avoid the bad things. But he also said that godliness is something that will profit you forever. And so godliness is really the pursuit of God, the desire to really look at God long enough so that you begin to reflect his personality. In psychology, this is called the effect of the significant other. That what they found is whoever is a person of great significance in your life, we just naturally, basically intuitively begin to mimic or imitate what they do. So what we find is in this world where there's certain celebrity personalities, some of them with really bad habits, bad attitudes, and bad behavior, are out there, and a lot of people look at them and they mimic them and they admire them. And the more they mimic them and pursue their life to be like theirs, the more miserable and happy they become. And Satan keeps on saying, you just got to try harder and it'll come your way. And the truth of the matter is it doesn't. It just gets worse and worse and worse. And that's why, as a follower of Jesus Christ, what I am saying is that Jesus becomes my celebrity. He becomes my significant other. I want to know him and the power of his resurrection. I want to understand who he is, be made conformable to his death, so that I might partake in the power of his resurrection, Paul said to the Philippians. And I think that becomes really a motivating drive for the child of God, that I don't just ask Christ to buy fire into my heart so I can have fire insurance to keep from going to hell. I ask Christ into my heart for that reason, but far beyond it, that I might live for him. I'll be quite honest that before I became a Christian, I saw so many people who professed to be Christians but didn't seem very Christ-like to me. It was, and so as a result, man, I thought, well, I don't want anything to do with Christianity because they're just a bunch of hypocrites. You ever heard that one before? Yeah. But then when I received Christ, I found myself saying, I don't want to go to hell and I want to be saved, but more than anything else, I wanted my life to conform to his. The more I read about him, the more I wanted to be like him. I became his fan, his admirer. And that's why we talk about people who are fans. It's a short form of fanatic. In other words, you go to a ball game and people are just acting hysterically. They're shouting and jumping up and down and gesticulating and throwing their hands in the air and doing all this stuff in ways that they would never do in the workplace or even on the street, but they've just kind of let it all go. Well, that's the thing, is that as a Christian, do I let it all go? In other words, not saying that your spirituality is measured by how high you jump. I think, as David Pentecost once said, I don't care how high you jump, it's how straight you walk when you come down. And that's the point. I want to see how Jesus walked. In fact, John said in his first letter in chapter 2, he said that we are to walk even as the way he walked. In other words, we're imitators of Christ. The word is actually mimics of Christ. We look at him and we say, I want to live my life the way he lived his life. Now, part of the struggle is that we have a lot of wrong conceptions about Jesus' teaching, Jesus' life, how he lived, and that's where study of the scriptures comes in. I mean, I listened to a celebrity who is professedly a Christian who was being criticized because they don't see anything wrong with homosexuality. And his retort was, you Christians are so judgmental. Well, he calls himself a Christian, as if not judging is the only commandment that Christ ever gave. And also revealing he doesn't really understand what that word judge means in the original language, what Jesus was talking about. He wasn't talking about, in fact, Paul said a spiritual man judges all things. A spiritual man looks at a situation and he draws a conclusion about what is godly and what is ungodly, what is right and what is wrong, what is true and what is false, what is good and what is evil. And to not make that distinction not only is missing the point, but it's unavoidable in the sense that you and I judge everything. Now, you may say, I don't. And we say, policemen aren't supposed to profile. But the reality is policemen have become experts at recognizing people who are about to do something bad. And so we create laws that restricts them from acting upon their experience and their instincts, which prove to be true 99% of the time. And we say, no, you have to sit there and wait till they actually do something wrong or harm somebody, and then they can act. Well, I get the problem. There have been some bad actors in police uniforms before, but they're very rare. They're not very common. And the same thing can be true about the pastorate or about the grocer or just about anything. There's some bad actors everywhere and everything. But most people become kind of experienced and instinctual about what they're doing. And so he says, you need to really become an expert by disciplining yourself and bringing yourself into the disciplines of Christ and studying him. As someone once put it, living in the school of Christ. Well, one of the things he talks about is, what about correcting people who are doing wrong things? I mean, you see people doing stuff that's not right. You and I do all the time. We hear people saying things that aren't true and aren't correct. I was sitting in a restaurant and listening to a conversation between two people, and the one guy was telling the other guy that abortion hardly happens anywhere more. It's not a big problem. It's people are overreacting, and I'm sitting there coming out of my skin because I want to get up, walk over, and saying, what you're saying is absolutely untrue, and let me correct you. I withheld myself because of what Solomon says here. He says, whoever corrects a mocker invites insult. And whoever rebukes a wicked man will incur abuse. Do not rebuke a mocker, or he will hate you. Rebuke a wise man, and he will love you. Instruct a wise man, and he will be wiser still. Teach a righteous man, and he will add to his learning. My pastor used to frustrate certain people. I remember one pastor who was having a lot of problems in his home and his marriage, his family, and his ministry. And he came to talk to my pastor, and he asked him for his advice on what to do. And Pastor Chuck said, no, I'm not going to give you my advice. And he said, why not? He says, because I've given you my advice in the past, and you've never listened to it. Now, I think he probably went on to give him his advice, but the thing that struck me was, as I watched the trajectory of this man's life and ministry, he ignored the things that Chuck said. I mean, it just was in him. I want your advice, but I'm not going to act upon it. I don't even understand that whole idea, but it's kind of like showing that I'm doing the right thing, but not really intending on doing the right thing. And that's why it says, give wisdom to people who are willing to be instructed. That's what when people get up and walk out of my services because they don't like or don't want to hear what I have to say, that really doesn't bother me, because they're not going to, even if they sit through the whole thing and to even take notes, it's not going to really impact their life because they do not see value in what I'm saying. So we have to understand that when we're sharing with people and we encounter people who Jesus would say, you're casting your pearls before swine, you need to recognize pigs have never appreciated fine jewelry or fine gems or fine gold or silver. To them, it's just mud is mud is mud. And that's why waste it? Why throw it away? And we find that Jesus oftentimes exercised that whole thing when he was asked these ridiculous leading questions that were designed to entrap him. What did Jesus say? Let me first, he said, ask you a question. For example, John, was he from God or was he not? And they wouldn't answer him. And Jesus said, because you won't answer me, I won't answer you. Because he knew that the motive of their heart was sinful and wicked. They were trying to entrap him. And so It may say, well, shouldn't I just speak up? I've known people. I was in a store not too long ago, and suddenly this guy just started preaching the gospel in this store with all these people. And I'm thinking to myself, does he really think that people want to hear this? I mean, people are just grumbling, saying, who's that nut and why doesn't he go away? Well, I think he felt good, felt like he had done something big, but all he had done is really irritate people. And if he had just simply sat down and had a conversation with somebody who was interested, then that might have been a different story. But the bottom line is that don't waste your energy trying to convince somebody who doesn't want to hear what you say and has no intention of listening to it. Find those people who are interested, because the time's short and we shouldn't be wasting our time on people who are disinterested. Maybe I'm doing that right now. I'm sorry. I apologize. Well, thank you for hanging out with me this week. And for me, it's always a blessing, and I pray that it's a blessing for you. I always ask God, let my ramblings and my babblings be something that helps people in their journey. And if you're helped, God bless you and thank you. Take care.